everybody, it's Margot here at My Favorite Quilt Store, and I just got a quilt finished and I wanted to give you some tips on squaring up a quilt. You should always square up the quilt before you put your binding on, because you've got to cut your backing and your batting off the front of the quilt to make sure that it's square. A lot of times when you send it out to a long arm quilter, they'll go ahead and square it up for you before they give it back. But I quilted this myself, and so I've got to square it up so that I can put the binding on. This is the ruler that I like to use. It's an Omni Grid. It's 20.5 inches square, and I like to use this one because I can really see and get it square, because I've got a big piece of area, because I've got a lot of blocks that I can work with. So what you want to do is take it and find the lines that are going straight, and make sure that this is lined up on a straight line so that you can see where you want to cut. You want to cut just at the edge of your quilt so you can get as much of the quilt as you want. So if it comes to points, this one does not have points on the edge. If it comes to a point, you need to make sure that you have at least a 1/4 inch outside the point, so that you don't cut off your points when you do your binding. So as you can see over here, there's a little bit of front of the quilt that we're going to be cutting off to square up, and that's the reason you do this, because if you were to just take scissors and cut around the whole thing, it wouldn't be square, and you would have a lot of wrinkles and in and outs along your quilt. It probably wouldn't hang straight. So the first thing we're going to do is look and see how this matches up, and then the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to take our first cut. So I always start, because I'm right-handed, from the right-hand corner and work my way to the left-hand corner. So here's how I do it. I come in, and I'm always on a large table. Make sure there's nothing underneath, and that all your extra batting and backing is out to the side. So I won't come all the way down to the end of the 20, but I'll come up to here, come up to the top, and square this off. A lot of times I am on my table at home that I can walk all the way around. This one I am not quite so lucky, and it's also got some extra mats on it, so it doesn't cut as friendly. So I will lean up and over. Normally I would walk around to get this to be a more favorable cut, but I'm able to stand on my tippy toes and do it, and now I've got this part cut. Can you grab me a pair of scissors, please? Mm-hmm. Well, I pulled it. Okay, so now I've got the first portion of my quilt done. So the next thing that I do is I come over to the complete other side and put my corner, square my corner on this one. And make sure that I have a square point, a square corner going into this side of it also. So I've lined it up on this block right here. That looks perfect. It's straight across the edge, straight across the side. So I'd come to my other side of the table, and I'm going to cut this way and get this cut off. A lot of times I'll use a pair of scissors instead of fighting with it like this. I don't have a good enough, so you got to make sure that you hold this down very, very carefully so that it will not slip. Even though it's a big ruler, you need to hold on to it very carefully so that it does not slip. If you don't get it cut on the first time, because you're cutting through a number of different layers, you will get it cut. Can't get that edge of that cut. Hold on one second, because I'm on a seam. Let me get the scissors and I will take care of that right there. Okay, so as you can see, I've got this side of the quilt cut, this side of the quilt cut, and this side of the quilt cut. Okay, so now this ruler is really not long enough to make the two in between. So what I'll do is I'll grab a longer ruler and just see how close it is. Oh, and it's very close to being completely straight. So what I do is I backtrack a little bit on the quilt probably about 5 to 6 inches to make sure that I've got this lined up perfectly right here so that I'm straight on my cut and that it is the same line that the first part of the quilt is cut on. And I'll cut down a little bit of a ways. This particular table has some extra mats on it, so that's what's making it a little harder to cut. Then I'll go down and make this line meet up. And now I have my top square. So I've cut off all the extra batting and backing along the top. The line is linear all the way across it. So now what I do is I flip the quilt around and do the bottom side second. So again, I'm going to start on the right side of my quilt because I'm right-handed and that seems to be easiest for me. I'm going to line this up. Now I'm not lining it up just on where the edge of the quilt is. I'm looking for a block in here and I'm using this block right here. Looking for a block in here that I can line up my marks with to give me the best possible straight of grain on my, or straight on the quilt that I have. Okay, so here I've lined that up, line that up. And as you can see, there's a little bit of the quilt top that you do cut off when you're squaring up the quilt. And that is very normal because there's going to be pieces that quilt slightly out of the line because of the way you're moving your fabric and quilting. So again, I'm lining it up on a line. So sometimes you will find quilt top will not come all the way to the edge, and that is fine because you're going to have a 1/4 inch seam with your binding on it. So it is fine if the quilt does not come, if it's within 1/8 of an inch that you're cutting, because you're going to have your binding over that. And I'll show you what I'm talking about up close in 1 minute. So I don't know if you can see, but right here, well, it just is just a hair of the batting sticking out past the, right here is another little piece. You see how there's just a hair of that sticking out? That'll be fine because all of that will be covered by your binding when you go to put your binding in right along here. So it's about 1/8 of an inch where the top does not meet the batting. Okay, so I'm going to use my other ruler again, go across the top. I'm going to backtrack about 5 to 6 inches to make sure that I've got this ruler straight. And here I found a block I could line it up against. So I've got 2 marks to line it up against. I left my rotary cutter down here. We'll get it. You can see we've cut off a little bit of the top right here, which is fine because it's just something that's outside the lines. Again, when I go over that tape, it's a little hard. So here you want to just make sure that both this is flush with the quilt and this is flush with the quilt. You got that? I moved it just a little bit. Sorry, I'm going to line it back up one more time because I moved it just a little bit. And voila, I get the last bit of it off. So now we've got our top and our bottom square, and now I'll work on the side. So I'm going to do it while pulling the quilt to me. So make sure that your quilt is completely laid out and you do not have any of it underneath. Before I've had someone have a problem where they had their quilt underneath when they were squaring it up and they cut a good portion of the quilt off, and so that is a problem. So make sure that you got your quilt lying flat and that there's nothing underneath it. Okay, as you can see on this, we only have a short bit to cut because we used our 20-inch ruler and got the biggest portion of it done. So again, what I'll do is I'll line up this ruler Make sure I can find a block that is straight. Okay, I found a block. Now I'm going to line it up on this, and I am going to come back and get this piece straightened up. So now that's done. I'm going to flip the quilt completely around. When you do that, you got to make sure you get everything straight. So you got to take your time, get it all straight on the table. Okay, so I'm going to lay this back out because it got kind of messed up. Lay this out flat, lay everything out flat. Make sure you don't have anything underneath the quilt, that it's just the quilt top that you're working with and the batting and the backing. Again, we're going to put it where I'm halfway in between the lines so I can see the lines on both sides. So I know I've got it straight. And I'm going to cut right there, and I've got that off. So now a lot of times what I'll do is I'll use this for the sleeve for the quilt, or I will use it for binding or something else, because there is always a little nice piece left at the top and the bottom that you can use in other places. So I save all of that. And then here is your quilt top all squared up. And now we're ready to put on the binding. And as you can see on this one, the binding I'm going to be using two different colors. I'm going to be using blue at the top and green at the bottom to go with the green features on the quilt and the blue features on the quilt. So we're going to get that as the next video to show you how to put on the binding and make it where it can be two colors. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you learned a little something on how to square up your quilt. Have a great day.